If someone said, I want to get to know you better, what would you say? If they said, tell me a little bit about yourself, what details would you include? Well, we kind of have like our standard answers to that, don't we? It's like, okay, here's what my name is. This is where the city that I'm from. This is what I do for a job. And here's something about my family. And so usually it's one of those four things that we describe as like, okay, this is a little bit about myself. But does that really like capture the essence of your identity? Well, no. I mean, it's not really meant to. If someone says, hey, I want you to tell me the essence of your identity, you'd be like, listen, I don't really want to be your friend anyway, so just, not only that, but you're not going to really want to explain that, but also could you? If you knew that somebody was going to ask that, could you like put it down on paper about who you really are? I think identity is something that is really hard for many of us to define. We struggle to articulate who we are even to ourselves, much less to anyone else. Has anyone wrestled with that before? I was trying to think about ways that I could help people, okay, like find their identity. And so what if, like, I got a mirror and sat someone in front of a mirror and then blindfolded them, and then I said, okay, when I take off your blindfolds, I want you to tell me the first few things that you see about yourself. And so if I took off the blindfold and you saw a reflection of yourself, would that help tell you how to explain your identity to the rest of us? Well, no, because what do you see when you look in the mirror? A lot of us see our flaws, right? I need to lose a few more pounds. I have too many wrinkles. I have too many gray hair. I don't recognize the person looking back at me. It's one of those combinations of things that we feel when we look in the mirror. And so how do we explain our identity? Well, maybe if we just had a question or two that were really good questions, that would really leverage, okay, who we really are. And so if I asked maybe something like, what are the biggest trials you have faced in your life? And how did you find the strength to overcome those trials? Man, that would be a really good question, wouldn't it? But would that, even as good of a question as that is that really who you are? Isn't it hard to define who you are? And maybe even more so is it's really hard to kind of stick to and live within the identity that you want for your life. I think we see this in this story of Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel was a chemist, a famous scientist. He has like 350 patents to his name. Amazing. His most famous patent was for dynamite. And so he created a way to have a stable explosive, and in his mind, he thought, this is great. I'm going to save many people's lives by this stable explosive, and so they would use this in mining, and yeah, he saved thousands of people's lives because it was far better than what they were using before. But when his brother died, there was a local newspaper who picked up the story and mistakenly thought it was Alfred who died. And they published this article with the tagline, "Merchant of Death Dies." Of course, this deeply disturbed him because he saw his identity as inventor and scientist and contributor to the betterment of society, and everyone else saw him as a merchant of death. And what do you do when that happens? You have an identity crisis. And so he has this identity crisis, and he decides to donate a large portion of his wealth to the establishment of the Nobel Peace Prize. And so that whenever you think of the name Nobel, you think of people like Mother Teresa. You think of people who have contributed greatly, like Martin Luther King Jr., to society and the betterment. And so when you hear his name, you think people who have made the world a better place. Isn't that clever? Isn't it brilliant? But doesn't it illustrate the point that our identity is so easy to drift away from our intended purpose, from the essence of who we are into something else? Have you ever felt that drift yourself within your own life? You know what you want your life to be about, yet you wake up after a few years and find yourself not living the identity that you want. See, our identity is hard to define and even more challenging to prevent your identity and your legacy from drifting in unintended directions. And so we're starting a new series today called True Identity. And in this series, what we want to do is kind of ask a number of questions, but these are probably three of the biggest. Is what is our identity? How do we discover it? How can we daily live into our true identity? And what is trying to undermine who we really are? And so this is the idea, these are the questions behind this. And so we're going to spend a lot of time on question number one today is what is our identity? And so to do this, I'm going to look at a passage in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. This is a beautiful passage, and it starts like this. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And so the very first part is what we focus on in this passage, that let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. And this is an amazing idea, that we be made in the image of God and the likeness of God. I remember being in third grade Bible class. Do you ever have these memories of like things you talk about like way back? And I remember talking about this as a class, and like we were made in the image of God, and so the discussion broke out of, okay, like what part of us is made in the image of God? And it was like, is it our eyebrows? Is it our eyes? Is it our chin? Is it our hair? Is it our body? What is it about us that is made in the image of God? What does God look like? Which is probably not the right question to ask. It's not really about what God looks like, but he says, I made you in my image. And what does that mean? And I think for a lot of us, we've wrestled with this question, okay, like I don't really think I look much like the image of God, so how does that make any sense? But if we look at the rest of the passage, it begins to make a lot more sense, but we just kind of stopped thinking after we got to the word. Because let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, and then there's this big word, so that. We are made in the image of God so that we may rule over God's creation. What? How do those two things connect? How does the fact that we are made in the image of God have anything to do with the fact that we are going to rule over God's creation? Well, for a lot of us, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the way I could explain this in the shortest amount of time is that God made us in such a way that it is possible for us to carry God's authority and expand his greatness by how we live. He made us in such a way that we carry his authority with us. He put us in charge over creation. And because we are made in his image, we bear his image as we do this. And we expand or magnify or just extend the reach of his glory by how we live our life. Now, this idea of glory is one of those that's like, oh yeah, churchy word, I don't really get it, I don't know how to define it, just kind of like we picture it as something kind of bright and shiny, right? And the word means fame, not the shallow kind of fame, but the true great fame. It means glory, it means weight, it means significance. And so if we hear the word of God, the word God used, and we think of something great and powerful and magnificent and good and pure, then that is all connected to the greatness and glory of God. And so if I could just visualize this for a second. Have you ever seen these paper lanterns? They're just these little small paper lightweight lanterns, and they hold some sort of candle or fire device, and so you put them in there, and then there's events all over the world, some of them religious, some of them just for fun, where they light these and they begin to fill the night sky with this light. And this is how God made us. We're the paper. We're the fragile. We're the thing that's not going to last very long, and he is the light that shines within us. And so when we are released, then this light shines, and it's not our light, but we shine in the darkness, and the glory of God is revealed in us and through us, but it's not our glory. It is the glory of God. And you might say, okay, well, my really analytical people, I know I got a lot of you in here. This is the Church of Christ after all, right? So we think hard about things. Well, how can we possibly add anything to the glory of God? I mean, look at us. You see the way our world is. How could we add anything to God's glory? And I think that there is a great way to explain this in that God has inherent glory. And we can't add to God's inherent glory. He is great. He is good. He is wonderful. He is pure. He is powerful. He is all of those things. We can't add to that. But there's also something called ascribed glory. And ascribed glory is different. It's something that we can add to God's glory. One analogy is a great way to explain this is gold. Gold has inherent value, doesn't it? You can use it for lots of things. You can use it to conduct electricity. You can use it in electronics. It doesn't corrode, which makes it extremely valuable. You can use it for jewelry. It looks good, but it's got a lot of inherent value and uses. But it also has an ascribed value. For our financial people, you would know this because if you ever follow the price on gold on the stock market, it goes up and down, and there are moments in which it goes crazy, and people are like, gold is worth so much. It's so valuable. And so it just skyrockets. And then also for those who are less maybe financially minded, you know that when you make gold into jewelry, into beautiful shapes and designs, it becomes more valuable than the gold itself is worth. It begins to be ascribed more value as well. And so although God has all of the glory inherently in him, he has made the earth in such a way where we can add to the glory of God, where we can contribute to his greatness and his weight and his significance and his rule over the earth by how we live our lives. But don't just take my word for it. We'll read it in Romans chapter 8, verse 18 through 23. He says, I consider that our present sufferings, this is Paul writing to the Roman church, are not worthy comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself would be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up until the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. This is a beautiful passage, and there's so much packed into so few words that, go home and read it a few dozen times. But there are 3 points that I want to draw out of this, is that God's glory will be revealed in believers. We are the intended container for God's glory. And as we reflect Christ's likeness, we begin to bear the image of God, and we shine the image of God, and we spread his glory everywhere we go. Are adopted as God's to fully display his glory. And so the way in which we display his glory is by being a part of the family of God. And so when we do things that are in line with the family of God, the family of God's glory gets spread. It multiplies, it magnifies, it goes everywhere, and everyone is in awe of what the family of God is able to do because of God and his power working within us. Where this leads is that creation will share in his glory. All of creation. when believers are fully redeemed. And so when we look at this, when we begin to understand this, is that our identity, who we are at the very core, is we are sons and daughters of God. If you woke up this morning and you thought anything other than my identity is a son and daughter of God, we have a problem. It is not in what you look like. It is not in what you know. It is not in what church you attend. It's not in anything else. It's not in how much money you have. It's not in any other thing other than you are a son or you are a daughter of the one true God, created to reflect his glory throughout the world. Amen. This is who we are and what we were intended to do. But we forget. Do you ever forget? Well, all the time. Do you ever forget something important? Well, yeah, we've done that too. Have you ever forgotten your very identity? Yeah, we've done that too. In fact, we do that all of the time. And it's really hard. Because within our world is opposed to the idea that our identity is son and daughter of God. It says that our identity is found in uncovering our own uniqueness and greatness. And so all of you have to do, according to our world, is you need to go and discover what makes you uniquely great. In a world full of 8 billion people, the task in front of you is to discover what makes you uniquely great above all other people so that your glory can be spread, so that your greatness can finally be realized. And the message of our world is that the biggest threat to your identity and to your own greatness is other people. It is other people who are keeping you down. It is other people that don't see the real you. It is other people who don't recognize the greatness that you have and the talent that you have. And so if we could just shed all of these other people out of the way so that everyone could see how great you really are, then your greatness would truly be seen. This is our world's idea of identity. And there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure. And ultimately, it leads to anxiety. It leads to depression. It leads to confusion, because this is not the path that God has laid out for us. God never said, I'm going to give you a unique identity that is different from all the other people on earth. And he said, I'm going to make you a son and daughter of mine. And that will be plenty. I'm going to give you a purpose and a mission. And we see this dark side of individualism. Not all individualism is bad. I think there's some good in it. But certainly tying individuality to our very identity is not something that God asks us to do. We see it in social media with this sort of authenticity movement of, this is who I really am. Either you accept me or reject me and don't get in my way. And we see it in the self-help and personal growth industry, with books being written about, okay, you've got to go and find your one true self. You've got to find your truth and your way and your light and your... We see it in education and career advice. Go find your passion and your mission. It's only yours. It's individual. It's unique to you alone, and no other person on the planet will have this mission and this purpose that is being put before you. We see it in Disney movies and media. I think of the movie Moana. Who keeps her from finding her true identity? Well, it's her family. It's her dad that won't let her go beyond the waves. And we see it in movies like Frozen. What is it? Well, it's the rules that you can't use magic. And so the way that she finds her true self is by getting away from all the rules and all the people and all the things that are going to keep her down so that she can find her true self. We see it in the New Age movements. And so the idea is this: meditate long enough and discover long enough and power in yourself that is big enough where you will gain power over the other people around you in the spiritual places. These things, these messages are not from God. This is not your identity. And if you found yourself in this rat race, I don't blame you. It is everywhere. But it is not the true identity that God has written that you have in Him. And so you've got to leave that idea behind to take hold of something far better and greater. And it is the glory of God. Trying to prove that your unique greatness in a world of 8 billion people will only lead to frustration. It is not how you were designed. And fulfillment comes from reflecting God's glory, not from seeking personal distinction. Does this make sense? Let me get some nods if you're still with me. Do you see this in our world today? Let me get some nods. And have you forgotten who you really are? Well, probably all of us have, and we go in and out of focus on these things. And what we want to do in this series is we're going to look at identity, but we also want to look at this in the frame of Israel as they leave Egypt and find who they really are in God. And in Exodus 1, 7 through 14, see this situation. Just if you don't know the story or are not familiar with it, read the book of Exodus later and you'll kind of get more of where it comes from. But Israel has found itself in Egypt. They had great forefathers of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And Jacob is also known as Israel. And Israel makes up the nation of Israel. And under him are basically his sons. It's a little complicated, but it ends up being the nation of Israel. They end up down in Egypt because Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, is able to sold into slavery. But he becomes in charge, second in command of all of Egypt because God gave him the ability to interpret dreams. But there came a moment identity was forgotten. Exodus 1:7 says, "But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. They were everywhere. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor and put Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. And in all of their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. And so what happens here is that Israel forgets their true identity. It happens slowly. It happens over 430 years is how long they were in Egypt. But it happens with, the first thing is they forgot. The king didn't recognize who they were and their unique heritage. And so they sort of forgot, too, who they were, where they came from, who their God was. And they were seen as a threat rather than a benefit. So they began to be seen as a threat instead of a benefit, and they began to compromise their beliefs because they were seen as unique and different is bad. They began to work them hard, first, I think, as workers, and then as slaves. And they became slaves to the point, and for long enough, that Israel believed their identity was a slave. And they believed, this is who I am. If you don't see any parallels in our world today, there are a few. We don't want to overblow the parallels by any means. But it's been very easy for the people of God to forget our heritage and who we are and what makes us special and unique. It's been very easy for the world to sort of treat Christians and Christianity as a threat rather than a benefit. And so when those two things are happening and we begin to forget, it's going to be easy for you to compromise your beliefs and the beliefs that are held in Scripture to adapt to culture and become something that is not Christianity at all. And as that begins to happen, you're not going to get a relief from those things. Now, we don't know the rest of how that's going to play out. I think we're kind of here within our story. And maybe our story is going to be much different. We have to wait and see, I guess. But I know that I don't want to be someone who has forgotten how God made us and who God made us to be. Now, the enemy is very clever. The enemy wants to sell you something that makes it look like it's good for you, but in actuality, it is slavery. And so when it says that your identity is found within, when the enemy says that your identity is found within, if you just discover, if you just look hard enough, if you just let all of the other people who really care about you go so that they don't hold you back any longer, what has happened? You're isolated. You're anxious and you're depressed because you can't find who you really are so that others will glorify you and think you're someone great and magnify your name, and you feel like you've lost your way. This is the world in which we live in today. What happens with God and Israel? Does God deliver them? Well, yeah. We know the Red Sea, of the pillar of fire and cloud and all the things, and in the land of milk and honey and all the good stuff. But he doesn't just deliver them physically. He delivers them back into their true identity. He restores his people, reminding them that they are not slaves. They are not wanderers. They are God's children who have a home in him. And I think if there's a message that our world needs today, if there's a message that Christians need now, it is this message. You are not slaves. You are not a hassle. Your faith is not a burden to our world. This is who you are. You are God's son. You are God's daughter with the purpose of reflecting who he is, which lives inside of you everywhere you go. So we've got to reject the world's effort. We've got to redefine. We cannot allow them to redefine our identity the way they want it. We must live as God's beloved children, magnifying his glory. Who knows who these two guys are? Call it out. Simon and Garfunkel. Garfunkel is the one with the weird hair. Simon and Garfunkel are known as one of the best harmony duets ever. What happens is that Paul Simon has an amazing talent, and Simon or Art Garfunkel adds to this. So as they sing, it's amazing. They became famous. They split up at some point, and Paul Simon began to do his own songs, and guess what? He was good. And he has many hits that are just his apart from Art Garfunkel. It's hard to say. Guess what? Art Garfunkel tried to go his own way too. Guess what happened? It was a flop. It didn't work. Do you know who these guys are? You might, some of our teens might know one of them. This is NSYNC. Well, guess what? Justin Timberlake decided he's going to go his own way. Guess what happened to the rest of them? Nothing. because they weren't nearly as talented as he was. But they together, something work, I don't know. But they made something work. Guess who this is? Destiny. You guys are good. Like, man, music history way better than Bible history around here. Destiny's Child. And of course, what happened? Beyonce goes her own way, and she is famous. She gets a lot of credit and glory, and guess what happened to the others? I don't even know who they are, so I don't know. I know it might be offensive in our world today to say this, but we were made to be the Art Garfunkel. We were made to be the other members of NSYNC, as painful as that is to say. We were made to magnify God's glory as his beloved child, as his children. This is who we are. We can't forget it. And so how do we do this? Well, whenever we worship God, like you did this morning, you are magnifying the glory of God. Whenever you give someone a compliment in a way that allows them to see who God is, you are magnifying the glory of God. When you write someone a card and encourage them in the faith, you are magnifying the glory of God. When you Bible study with someone who does not know Christ or someone who does know Christ, you are magnifying the glory of God. When you share your faith or your story or the fact that you are magnifying the glory of God, it goes and goes and goes, and you can't stop it because God gets the glory. This beautiful story in Matthew 26, and it's the story of the woman who anoints Jesus. And in this story, Jesus stops sort of the thing and just says like this, listen, this is what's going to happen. Truly, I tell you, there's a lot of criticism around this. How expensive it is. He says, truly, I tell you, this gospel is, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. He said, story will be famous. Is her name given? Why is she famous? Because she gave glory to God. She is gospel famous. She is God famous because she added something to the glory of God. And so the question I think today is, are you living with spiritual amnesia? Are you living with identity amnesia? Do you remember who you are? And are you living like who you say you are in Christ? And if the answer to that is no, then I think today's the opportunity. We're going to sing a song in just a minute. If you want to remember who you really are in Christ, we're going to ask that you come here down to the front row, and we'll pray with you, or you can go back to the prayer room, and we'll have an elder back there to pray with you also. But if today is a day that you need to remember who you truly are, then I ask that you come while we sing about our true identity in God.